been asked to talk to you about on the theme of excellence in teaching. And your minister can attest that almost on every occasion when we meet in a regional forum, I say to him that there is something very special about St. Kitts and Nevis. And I'm not saying this because I'm here. He can attest that I've said that to him on every occasion. I just regret that he's let out the secret as to why we did the launch of results here in St. Kitts Nevis, because now other countries are going to ask me questions about this. But I'm saying this because what is distinctive, I think St. Kitts Nevis has over the years become a very quiet, unassuming light in education in the OECS and the wider Caribbean. And I'm not the only one who shares that view. Professor Errol Morris has spoken to this, particularly with respect to secondary education. There's a lot of pioneering work that has been done, and I want to use the opportunity to pay tribute to this country, and if I may, to a permanent secretary who for many years was very active in helping to promote that, who was also our former deputy chairperson, Mr. Petty. So I want to take a journey with you today on the theme of excellence, and those who would have heard me speak before know that I believe in speaking truth to power. And I think when we speak within the Caribbean family, we need to speak with a measure of honesty to each other. It was the famous African liberation fighter, Amilcar Cabral, who said that the fundamental battle we have to wage is the battle against our own weaknesses and contradictions. So while it is good to congratulate ourselves and recognize our achievements, because of the brutal and unrelenting competition that we face in today's world, we have to be equally and perhaps more prepared to face our contradictions in order to better ourselves. So I want to start with some discussion of first principles, then look at the restoration of respect, the challenges of 21st century teaching and learning, talk to you, especially as teachers, about some classroom brass tacks, and end with CXC's contribution to change. There's a Lebanese poet called Khalil Gibran, who in a famous book called The Prophet said this. The prophet was asked to speak to us of work, and he said, work is love made visible. And if you cannot work with love but only with distaste, it is better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of those who work with joy. For if you bake bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half man's hunger. And if you grudge the crushing of the grapes, your grudge distills a poison in the wine. And if you sing, though as angels, and love not the singing, you muffle man's ears to the voices of the day and the voices of the night. And I want to dedicate those verses to our new cohort of teachers, because, you know, we all say that teaching is more than a job. It's a profession, it's a vocation. But in too many instances, we see people in teaching who are there because it was just the easiest job they could find after leaving school. And if this is what you are in it for, you should not be a teacher. Bitterness, you know, you bake bread with indifference, or you grudge the crushing of the grapes, you create poisonous food. And it is the same with teaching. I have heard many teachers talk about their students in the most disparaging ways. As a PS in St. Lucia, I remember an occasion when I had to intervene in a dispute at a school. And they were very annoyed with the education officer for some remarks he made and insisted that the PS come. So I came, listened to them speak for 3/4 of an hour. They described the children at the school as animals, as brutes, as ill-mannered, as criminals. And then when they threw, I said to them, I listened very carefully to you, and I think all of you should submit your resignation as teachers. Because if the children who are placed under your care can be described and seen by you only as criminal, as brutes, as animals, then what is your job as a humanizing agent for these children, you know. In the Prophet, Khalil Gibran also speaks about the teacher. He was asked to speak to us of teaching, and he said, the teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but of his faith and his lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you to enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. And that encapsulates the core of what teaching is about. That yes, the days when the teacher was a sage on the stage are over. Because you know what? Learning is no longer about knowledge. In my time, we could cram to pass exams. I got through my UE exams, Lyme for the year, the last 3 months before exams, went into sweatshop cramming, and was able to get honors. But this can't happen anymore in today's world. And if it happens, it's not going to help you. Because knowledge is changing so fast that if you want knowledge, you can just Google it. You want to know what the latest thing is? I mean, I can't even tell you how many planets there are in this solar system. I'm serious, because you check it out. The textbooks probably still say there are, 7 or 8 planets, 9 planets. But then in the last couple of years, they've discovered 2 or 3 more planets. And the only way to keep abreast of that is to keep Googling it. So knowledge is changing fast, and so the whole paradigm of what learning is different. It is now about your own capacity, and we're going to look in some more detail at that. But essentially, this business is about attitude. Education is a journey of discovery of yourself, of the world, and of life. And Paulo Freire, who was a famous Latin American educator, said that the most important duty of an educator is to love. If you do not love your students, you are no use as a teacher. I don't care what degrees you have, what class of degrees you have, how many degrees you have in education. It is that fundamental duty to love that makes a difference. After my years of experience, if I had to sit on any panel to choose entrance to the teaching profession, the basic quality I would be looking for is that capacity to care and to give pastoral guidance to students. Because it's not enough. The technical thing doesn't matter. It matters only to the extent that it is technique. But getting your students on board is what is important. And that brings me to the issue of the restoration of respect. Because often we hear people talk about the need for teachers to be more respected in society. And the unions in particular are constantly calling for the showing and demonstration of greater respect. And who can argue with the need for more respect to teachers? You've heard it on this podium this morning that, you know, a doctor may save a life, a teacher saves a community, a teacher creates a future. But ultimately, the beginning of respect starts with you. You cannot demand respect if you do not show respect for yourself. And it is that courage to make a difference that speaks to that respect. Speaking from the trenches. Ministries of education, I believe, have a fundamental challenge in this Caribbean to learn to listen to the voices of teachers. When I was PS in the ministry, it was an incoming government. The minister and I spent our first day in office together, locked up, defining what was going to be the basic policy statement of this administration. And the statement we made just had 2 points. That going forward, the priorities in education were twofold. One, to transform the ministry from a command center to a service center. And 2, to make the school the center of focus of the education system. Because if you think about it, the whole apparatus of education exists because of the child, the student, the learner, and everything else is the supporting architecture around this, right? So it is not about your position in a ministry or your stage in the hierarchy. It is about what value do you bring to that chain of learning the focal point of which is the individual child. And one of the litmus tests is, the basic litmus test I often told people that we should apply to any policy that we define in the ministry is to ask ourselves, if this can apply to my child, it is good. If I would not want it applied to my child, it cannot be good for anybody else's child. The quest for excellence must be driven by an unquenchable thirst. And that thirst is about being hungry and thirsty for more, for better, for going higher. You heard the figures on St. Kitts and Nevis. You stand head and shoulders above many other countries in the region in respect of performance. But I want to pose to you one challenge in which you are still ahead of the rest of the region, but it is a challenge that you must confront head on. You, first of all, as teachers, with the support of your ministry. When we look at performance across the Caribbean, in CSEC, as you know, for any decent wage employment, 5 or more subjects is what is considered to be the benchmark. In the Caribbean as a whole, 66% of the students in 2013 sitting exams got no subject, so grade 1 to 3, which people call passes, in no subjects or less than 2 subjects. 66% of them. Only 22% got 5 or more subjects. In St. Kitts and Nevis, 27% got no subjects, 26% got 1 subject, 9% got 2 subjects, 28% in St. Kitts and Nevis, as compared to 22% across the region, got 5 or more subjects. That is the challenge that you have to face. That we need to invert those figures. That 66 must be converted from 0 or less than 2 to 5 or more subjects, because today's competition requires that that is where we go. On the value side, it's about life and job skills. You see it all the time. Brilliant people come in for job interviews and they sloppily dress, they have no manners, they have no values. What is the sense of having a first-class honors degree and a PhD and so on, and you have no ethics? You will trample on anyone to get where you want to get. At the end of the day, you have to recognize individual ambition is important, but individual ambition always exists in a social context. And if it is at the price of the social context, then we have lost it entirely. And again, to come back to my earlier point about how all these things connect back to how the future connects back to the past. When you were growing up, our grandparents knew this. They were very simple Christian values. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Are we seeing this principle in our commerce, in our life, in our communities? And then we wonder, why is there this erosion of community and purpose in Caribbean life? Meta-knowledge is not just being able to reproduce a set of facts or regurgitate something, but being able to assimilate it and repackage and reposition it, incorporate it into your own mental framework, your paradigms of thinking, so that you can create your own knowledge. Ultimately, the purpose of learning is to allow us to create knowledge. Otherwise, we in the Caribbean will always be users of other people's products and consumers of other people's knowledge. And if you ask yourselves, who are the shining stars of the Caribbean? The Nobel laureates of the Caribbean? They have created new knowledge. And they've created knowledge that has given value to the world, which is why they've become Nobel laureates. There are Caribbean people. There's a professor from Barbados at MIT, Cardinal Ward. He has over a dozen patents in fiber optics to his name. There's a St. Lucian professor in the UK who has 6 fiber optic patents to his name. All of his patents are classified by the Department of Defense in the UK. right? And I'm sure for every Caribbean country, in fact, this is something we're trying to undertake at CXC now, to pull and find, excavate those names. In the diaspora, there are Caribbean people of great distinction who are inventors and innovators and on the cutting edge of their disciplines, who are recognized internationally and not even known in their hometown. There's a professor at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, in the Faculty of Management, who has approached us to partner with them on a project to identify such persons and create a Caribbean memory bank so that these people can get incorporated into our syllabi. When we do in physics, it's not enough to talk about Galileo and who, Newton and all these guys who are in the physics. We must also talk about some of the contemporary Caribbean people who are adding to the field of knowledge in physics, even if it is an add-on to the syllabus, so that young Caribbean people doing physics can understand this is not about dead white people who have created things, but here too are Caribbean people who are pushing the envelope of knowledge and human progress. So at CXC, we've been doing some of our own theorizing because I again believe that we are not just there to use other people's theories. Everybody's talking about 21st century learning. We've been through our own process in CXC to define what should education in the 21st century mean for the Caribbean. And we boiled it down to three main areas. We think that in this 21st century, education should serve the purposes of building individual capacity in the region. It should serve the purpose of developing knowledge capital, because I'm sure you know, when I did economics in secondary school, we were told that there were three factors of production: land, labor, and capital. You read any good economics textbook today tells you there are four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and knowledge. And the greatest of these, as again going back to the past, as the Bible says, is knowledge. So knowledge capital and social and collective capacity is the other critical thing. So when we talk about individual capacity, we're talking about ability for continuous learning. No matter where you are in education, there is always room to learn more, right? And it doesn't matter what your level is. It's more obvious at the lower levels. If I have CSEC, then I know there's CAPE ahead of me. If I have CAPE, I know there's a first degree, associate or first degree. First degree, there's a master's. Master's, there's a PhD. Well, guess what? Beyond the PhD, there's something called a postdoc. Now, when you get there, have you arrived? No. Because, again, what I said earlier about knowledge changing exponentially, it has now been estimated that if you're doing a 4-year degree right now, by the time you have reached your 3rd year, what you would have learned in your 1st year is largely obsolete. Right? That is the rate of obsolescence of knowledge. So we have to keep going. And I often tell some of my friends, I know people who have PhDs, and for them the PhD is a real badge to wear on your sleeve. You know, everybody must address you as Dr. So-and-so, and so on. But, you know, if you're really serious about your own self-development, the irony of this is that the more you pursue learning, the more you achieve and the more you learn, you know what you finally come to realize? The magnitude of your own ignorance, right? Because you realize that there is so much more to learn, right? And so much more to question, right? That what all this higher learning really should do for you is to just give you the means to question, the means to investigate, the means to search.